Okay, we are here. It's 1:48 on Monday, October 11th, for a meeting of the Planning, Housing, and Economic Development Committee to continue our work on Thrive. We had a technical difficulty. We started the meeting and found out it was not broadcasting the audio portion over the internet broadcast, and so we took a quick pause, and we believe that that is now fixed. Sadly, our brilliant commentary has been lost to the ages. So I'm not sure how much I'm going to try to repeat, but you know, I will seek to be as concise as possible. We're working on the housing element today, and it's a major topic of Thrive. There has been a lot of confusion out there because in the very broadest sense, Thrive is being discussed in the public at the same time as a separate proposal that addresses housing issues is also being discussed in the public. And one of them, indeed, is an implementation of the broad concepts of Thrive. It's not the only implementation. It is a proposal of how you could do the kinds of ideas that are talked about in Thrive. But for a lot of people, they've become one and the same. And Thrive itself does not grant anyone any property rights that they don't have. It doesn't change any zoning, does not enable anyone to do anything with their land that they could not previously do. It is a vision document, a policy document, a manifesto of sorts. And it calls upon planners to pursue certain approaches and to consider certain ideas and to think about how we do our work in certain ways. And we've been implementing Thrive in a sense for a long time because a lot of the ideas in Thrive are ideas we've already put into practice in our most recent iteration of planning these past 10, 12 years. So the housing piece has been very controversial because it seeks to allow more flexibility in housing types around the county. And it calls upon the planning department to consider plans where cottages and cottage courts and duplexes and multiplexes might be appropriate. It does not say where they would be appropriate. It does not make any exact, recommendation of that, but it certainly urges the planning process to look at that issue and more often recommend that kind of housing. And that has been, something that has been a topic of great controversy. But Thrive itself has a fairly limited scope or impact in that policy. The question is, does the county council believe that in a general way, we should consider those kinds of options? Not where they're going to be or what they'll look like or what exactly any options are, but should we look at those kinds of options? So, we will be taking this up today, and we'll talk through some of the language that has come to us and whether we want to embrace that or seek some additional changes. And and our work will continue here. So pass it over to Councilmember Friedson for some comments that he wishes to make.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. We've heard from residents from all over the county who are angry about Thrive and fearful what it means for the county, for their neighborhoods, as you mentioned. To those listening and watching, if you're frustrated and concerned, I get it. I believe fundamentally that housing is a human right, and I support most, if not all, of the policy goals that are in the housing chapter that we're about to discuss, especially the need for and the value of mixed income communities, which is really at the heart of what this chapter is about and what the goal here is and continues to be. I also believe that our general plan should and must be a high-level strategic vision, not an implementation document. That's why from the beginning of the discussion, I've urged us to review Thrive before jumping into any specific legislative implementation tools. It's difficult to implement a vision before we've actually agreed on it, and it's challenging to get the type of broad-based buy-in we need to make significant changes if we've created an impression that the outcome has already been decided. Our residents have at times received mixed messages. Most of us have stated as we are here today and as the packet notes, that Thrive is a vision document, setting general policy goals for the next 30 years. But the continued work on attainable housing strategies at the planning department and the list of actions sent over to us with Thrive have created some skepticism in the community. Many support Thrive as a visionary document and many of the recommendations in it, but take some issue with some of the verbiage that implies approval of specific actions rather than a broad-based vision for how the county should grow over the next several decades. That's certainly true as it relates to the list of actions that are part of the appendix, a list that has been presented as a roadmap of predetermined actions, creating some understandable confusion that this once in a generation exercise is in fact a fait accompli. It's virtually impossible to discuss the directions at the same time we're deciding on the destination. That's why I keep reiterating that process matters, that transparency and consistency in our process is what builds public trust. We need to do what we say we're doing because our words matter, especially when crafting a generational document like the general plan. I want to be crystal clear, the Thrive document we're reviewing now does not legislate anything. It does not implement anything. Implementation of specific policies requires a bill or a zoning text amendment or a functional plan. The work being done on attainable housing strategies at planning is not even before us. Nothing has been sent over, and we're not reviewing or approving the list of actions. They will not be adopted with Thrive. I really do appreciate, Ms. McMillan, your packet pointing out some of the tweaks in the language for us to consider, particularly the language from Chapter 3, and for the background information you provide on the housing element in our COG resolution. It's particularly helpful to point out the parallels between the document we're discussing today and the documents approved and adopted by previous councils. As Ms. Wright has noted here before this committee in our discussions about Thrive multiple times, we are really moving forward with ideas in Thrive that build upon agreed upon principles which have had broad consensus in the past. I appreciate the work that has gone into this generational document. The planning staff, planning board, the council staff all deserve a tremendous amount of credit for all of the efforts over 2+ years of work. I also appreciate the passionate advocacy on all sides of these issues. We owe it to everyone involved to get this process right, to be clear and consistent with what this document is and what it isn't, to build broad consensus around the vision we have for the county over the next 30 years. And then, once we've gotten the process right, once we've built consensus around the vision for where we want to go, let's work through the details of exactly how, when, and with what specific tools we plan to get there. Thank you, and I look forward to today's discussion.
All right. Councilmember Jawanda.
Thank you. I'm glad I didn't have to do the take two, but it sounded good both times coming from Councilmember Friesen, from both of you. Good to see everybody, and I just want to make a couple of comments as well. The interest in this work is because housing is a human right and it's very expensive. And too many of our residents and our neighbors struggle to find affordable, high quality housing. And it's at every level of income, every type of person, every age. It's really acute for our lowest income residents, obviously, but if you're a graduating college senior and you want to come back and live here, it's acute for you too. And if you're a senior who's trying to stay here, it's acute for you too. All right, so we have challenges across the spectrum, and I think that's part of the reason that this is such a topic that we have all the time across the country. But here, we're in a metropolitan area where we have some of the highest cost housing in the country, right? And not enough housing, which we'll obviously talk about and address. I think that the point that was made in the packet very well, and even better than I already knew this, but the actual language was put here. If you looked at the 2011 housing element of the general plan, which had been updated, just 10 years ago, at the time of the last census, the 4 objectives: housing and neighborhood connectivity, diverse housing and neighborhoods, housing and environment, and housing and neighborhood design. If you look at the diverse housing and neighborhoods bullet, create diversity in the type and size of units, neighborhoods, facilities, and programs to accommodate current and future residents. This is something that we still need. It's something that I think would be broad enough to encapsulate some of the changes that the zoning changes in different types of housing and size. It uses those exact words, type and size of units, for example. And the work around attainable housing, which has been the thrust of the public concern around this in the debate over the last year or so, is already, in some general terms, which is the goal of the general plan, discussed, right? Last December, I introduced a package of bills aptly called More Housing for More People. I also am a big fan of More of Everything and Housing for All, which I like the new title. I won't bury that lead. But in More Housing, More People, the concept was things we're going to discuss today. How to get more diverse types of housing, particularly where housing is most expensive, most scarce, and also most needed for our environment, for connectivity to jobs and amenities near metros. And so I did introduce a zoning text amendment, which is before the council, to allow for duplex, triplex, quads near transit, right? We are going to consider that in the course after Thrive. I agreed with my colleagues on that. I think that was fine. But I want to point out that we already could have considered it under the 2011 update. And the planning department had done work for years building out the concept of missing middle, which again is one small part of a vision document that will need to be implemented for years and years to come through various master plans, ZTAs, and the like, as was mentioned. And we have to, the other component was a anti-rent gouging bill, also near transit. We know that rent and the almost 40% of our county who do rent disproportionately are low-income Black and brown residents, and many seniors as well, are paying some of the highest costs for rent in the country. We're a top 10 most expensive market. Since January, prices in this region, rental prices are up more than 11%. They have dramatically increased. That's one of the reasons we paused the increase of rents and capped their amount during the pandemic, and hopefully we'll continue that because many were still in the pandemic. But that bill was a package that I introduced because we do really need more of everything. We need more preservation, we need more production, and we need more protection of renters. And all those topics are touched on in this chapter in a general way, which is appropriate for Thrive. But I wanted to put that context in since the elephant literally is in the room, and I was part of that conversation introducing this bill and this CTA last December. So we'll move forward in due course. I know planning has some other ideas, and we'll present those to us after we get through Thrive. But there are many, many good things in here that we'll talk about today, as well as the larger Thrive document. And appreciate all the comments from the public. And just don't worry, we're going to take these things in turn and move through them appropriately and make sure it matches and fits with all the different types of communities we have in the county. So I just wanted to make those points, and looking forward to the discussion with colleagues. Thank you.
Thank you. I'll just add to that, the first bill, I think, or zoning text amendment that I introduced in this council term was the accessory dwelling units. And, that is, of course, very much part of what Thrive envisions, and council passed it unanimously, and I think it's already getting tremendous results, and it's going to keep getting better results. So part of why, the comment is we're implementing these planning goals. We're doing this. We've been doing it for some time. And there's a lot of, I think, confusion about, it's just confusion about everything. Okay. Sorry about my notifications dinging. I've got a new laptop and I don't yet know how to fix that setting. Haven't had a chance to do that yet. So let's go to our council staff, unless Casey or Chair Anderson or Ms. Wright, would you like to make a comment as we proceed?
No, I think that's fine. And I think that we're certainly open to finding a way to communicate more clearly, if that's the judgment of the committee, that this is not foreordained, and would be happy to work with you on some language to achieve that.
Terrific. Okay, well, buried the lead there. Okay, so there's reference in the packet to, potential options around continuing, potential options of language around some of the attainable housing issues or related issues, and you're suggesting you'd be more than happy to keep massaging that or work on that a little bit more and bring it back to us as well. So, okay, let's go to council staff. Is that Linda first or is that Pam? All right, welcome, Linda McMillan.
Good afternoon. I just want to say, before we dive into housing, as has been in all your packets, you have some information to just remind you about the complete vision that's in Thrive. And so this is on page 2. And so just to remind folks that as we look at housing, we're looking in it with the overall vision as planning described to you. So that's to maintain constrained growth areas, reintroduce East County growth corridors as a key to racial equity and economic competitiveness, place an emphasis on east-west growth corridors with transit, protect the agricultural reserve and make it more accessible and relevant to the whole county, and look for new ways of thinking about growth, such as parking lots to places, complete communities, and 15-minute living. So I just wanted to remind everybody we're here to talk about the housing chapter, just as you've talked about each chapter, but we are talking about it within the context of all of Thrive. And so those are the main visions that planning had described to you. I think you've all already touched on the next point I had made in the memo about Thrive not changing zoning and re-emphasizing that. It is a revision to the general plan and it's a policy document. And so you've gone over that. Councilmember Friedson and Councilmember Jawando also touched on part of the memo, which I just want to highlight, which is that I did include in the memo background for you, not to go through everything, but so that you could see the revisions to the general plan going from 1993 to 2011, the 2012 draft housing policy, the 2019 council resolution adopting COG housing goals, and also just some summary about the planning board's current work on attainable housing to give people an idea of where that is. And the original, some summaries about the original chapter of Thrive 2050 and the executive branch comments. And also has been noted, a lot of the themes that are present in Thrive 2050 are already present in previously approved council documents, whether they were revisions to the general plan or policy documents such as the COG resolution. The things that are probably more specific in this plan are a discussion of the compact communities, and 15-minute living as a concept is a little more refined than in the 2011 plan. And then also the document does include a visual to show what the range of housing types might be, all the way from ADUs up to multifamily, but it includes what is generally talked about as missing middle. And so some of those are the duplexes, the triplexes, the quadplexes, the cottage housing. So there is a visual in this plan that is a little different than in some of the previous plans. But as you've noted, the previous plans all specifically talked about diversity in housing. So as a general theme, the themes are the same. There is a little bit more specificity in Thrive and some visuals about what diversity in housing might mean. What I also noted for you was that the housing chapter for the general plan is to be about all housing. We want all housing for all of our residents. It's not about one specific type of housing. It's not a market rate housing chapter. It's not an affordable housing chapter. It's that chapter for all housing. And so that's really the reason why it's important that be emphasized. And so the first thing that I've noted for you in the revision that planning staff and council staff have been collaborating on and is included in your packet at circles 1 through 17 is the change in the title. And the title is now Housing for All, More of Everything. And that is to emphasize that it is indeed about housing for all within that bigger vision that we talked about at the very beginning of the chapter. So the first and one of the more important revisions in the chapter, again, relates to the title.
Thank you. Let me just pause there for a second because I think this is interesting. And Dan Reed recently tweeted about this in a very general way, talking about how, it's how did progressives get to the point where they were, leaning in the other direction from making things like housing more available or clean energy more available or transportation more available. And like, this is what we're trying to make all these opportunities more abundant, and like housing abundance is really what we should be going for. And what a strong position the community will be in when there's more housing just in general at every price point of every type, and how it just, it creates a more supportive environment. And of course, it's good for consumers and people who live in housing to have more housing available. But of course, that kind of restricts, like, I have to say, the whole trend of planning is almost, in some ways, leans against that, right? It's sort of like, how do you restrict? Not necessarily planning, but the politics of planning. And planning does restrict where you can get housing. And this county has pretty restrictive policies. And as a result, I think in some ways we're restricting the amount of housing that we get. The lack of permits, the lack of new housing, all, the moratorium that we finally got rid of. All these things make it harder for housing to be more abundant. And so I do think that at a very high level, we do need to issue a call for housing abundance, for more of everything. I like that shift a lot. I think it's cool. Sorry, didn't mean to interrupt you, or maybe I did, but let's keep going anyway.
The other thing that I wanted to say is that in the revisions that we've made to the chapter that are before you, not only are revisions made to be clear that housing should be available and affordable to all our residents, all income levels. We want all of our folks to be welcome here in all kinds of housing that fits where they are in life. But we also strengthened the language regarding the environmental advantages, both of new construction, which can come with improved stormwater management, use of clean building materials, technology, energy efficient lighting and appliances, but also that preservation and renovation, as we are working on as well, of currently affordable housing can contribute to environmental goals, because there are opportunities to rehabilitate the housing using eco-friendly and modern technology to improve energy efficiency. So the general themes of the revisions we've made are basically in those categories. The packet then, as your other staff memos have done, moves into showing you the main policies that are in the chapter and the practices that are under each. And so we can, if there aren't any other comments just on the general themes, we can look at each of these and see whether you have changes. I did want to say when we get to the second of the main policies is where there is the discussion of the chapter 3 potential language changes.
Okay.
Okay.
Let's proceed.
So the first general policy is to encourage the production of more housing to better match supply with demand. As in the case with your other revised staff reports, you'll see that the 3 economic, equity, and environment references have been put by each of the practices that are included. And so you'll see that this includes expanding opportunities to increase residential density, especially along major corridors and in locations where additional housing can assist in the development of complete communities. increasing the number of income restricted affordable housing units, especially for low income households. As part of the commitment to Housing First, which I'll just say for those listening, Housing First is the adopted policy of the county to work to move people from homelessness into housing as quickly as possible and without barriers. That is what a Housing First policy is. So you would develop strategies to build deeply affordable housing and provide permanent supportive housing, which of course provides not only deeply affordable housing, but the support services people need. Support building codes that reduce costs by accommodating innovative construction methods. This notes, in particular, modular, prefabricated housing and mass timber. Of course, there may be other new and innovative ways to reduce housing costs that are not listed there. Those are two examples. Prioritizing the use of public land for co-location of housing and other uses, especially where government agencies design new facilities and dispose of real property. Of course, this is already the policy and practice of the county. And I would just note, when you did the Veers Mill plan, you actually had two different property dispositions within that. One for a really, brand new big community over where Roundhouse Theater and Recreation previously were, but also a smaller one that got you the no net loss of affordable housing. So the county has done a good job in this respect, but it is an important policy and practice to continue with. Increase regulatory flexibility to incentivize residential infill, redevelopment of office parks, shopping malls, and other underutilized properties, and provide financial incentives to boost housing production for market rate and affordable housing, especially near transit and incomplete communities. I would just note on this one, you did receive a comment that perhaps it would be better if the language wasn't limited to financial, or if it said financial and other incentives, so as not to
and incentives. There's
right, so that it would just
incentives.
include any range of incentives that might be available, and so we could make that change if the committee so thought that was a good idea. So that's the first set of policy and practice.
If I could just comment briefly on that. I do think it's important to talk about financial incentives, because the economics of housing is very problematic, and it's a part of the reason why the number of new building permits is so low now. It's just not, the private sector isn't able to produce enough housing to meet the demand because the costs are so high relative to their anticipated return. And so, I liked this piece because I think it was a clear call for action on the financial issues surrounding housing, and the need to just think about how to boost market rate and affordable housing through financial incentives. So, I'm certainly open to deepening that or adding some layers to that, but I would like to suggest that we retain the focus there on broadly the economics of housing and financial incentives. Maybe we could say, as well as, after the maybe after the sentence as it is, add an as well as or something.
Right. And I think, generally the reason for the other incentives, like the use of public land or increased density, is really to change the economics, right, to make the housing project move forward. So I think, if we just could say financial and other, we would probably be fine.
Let's keep going. Good. Thumbs up. Councilman Thornton.
Thank you. Before we move on to the next part, I just have something here. I think certainly, as I said in my opening statement, we need more housing. I'm yet to find a place where there's enough housing to deal with the need in the world, certainly in the U.S. and certainly in our region. So we definitely need more. One of the things that I have pushed, and you alluded to it, Ms. McMillan, in previous master plans, not just Veers Mill, but also when we dealt with Forest Glen and other areas, is this idea of how we prioritize and use public land. And making sure that it gets deeper levels of affordability where we have a lot of skin in the game and can remove some of that cost and help make deals move forward. You mentioned the county does do this, and we have done a pretty good job, but it's a very important policy. So one of the things, I introduced a bill to require certain levels of affordability at 30% on public-owned land that's going to be used for housing be affordable, and that 15% of that 30 be affordable at the 50% or less of AMI. While not appropriate to put numbers here, I would like to propose putting a bullet that either right after that public land bullet, right after the fourth bullet, that says include units affordable for low income and very low income households and any project that uses public land for housing or the co-location of housing. Just again, underscoring that this is a really important part of our strategy to provide housing for people at every income level. So that's what I'd like to propose adding, if my colleagues are amenable.
I think that sounds, well, let's hear from Councilmember Friesen.
Yeah, I appreciate it. I mean, we've worked very hard on these similar issues. I just am a little sensitive to being too overly prescriptive. So I think we can just work on the language of this to not dictate, what happens. Obviously, we hold all the cards in the disposition of public land, and this continues to be something that we want to try to do, that we are supposed to try to do, that all of us wish we did, frankly, more of in the disposition of public land. But I think it's just important that it not be overly prescriptive. I mean, there are examples of creative approaches that you may have a variety of public benefits, including open space. There could be units nearby that lack access to certain amenities that would be benefited from that use of public space. So I just think that, again, this is a visionary document. It's not intended to prescribe policy, and so whatever language we decide, I agree with the overarching value there, but prioritize public land for co-location of housing and other uses, and with an emphasis on mixed income, on providing housing opportunities at all income level, or particularly lower income levels.
That's what I was hearing.
Right.
Yeah.
It wasn't that it was retaining the same focus of a priority on housing, but it was specifying that the housing should also be for low and very low income.
This isn't a disagreement. This is just as we craft the language, the hope that we keep in the spirit of the high level goal here. And I was saying before, I with Linda, your recommendation before, provide financial and other incentives, I thought that was a good approach to that language and reflects what I think was the intention of those who have commented on that particular line. So, thanks.
Yeah, and I mean, I can say, I was saying including units affordable for low income and very low income households in projects that use public land. But I'm happy to work with, if we want to change that slightly. I think again, I think it sounds like there's general agreement, but I just think that should be a part of that, or a part of that.
Noted.
Okay, and I will get back to you with language on that to make sure it's acceptable to everybody.
Thank you.
Okay. The second of the policies and practices is to plan for a wide range of housing types and sizes to meet diverse needs. And so this includes facilitate the development of a variety of housing types in every part of the county, but especially in areas near transit, employment, and educational opportunities. Support creative housing options, including personal living quarters and/or micro units, missing middle housing types such as tiny houses, cottages, duplexes, multiplexes, and small apartment buildings, shared housing, co-housing, accessory dwelling units, social housing, and cooperative housing to help meet housing needs and diversify housing options. Encourage provision of multi-bedroom units suitable for households with children in multifamily housing, and integrate people with disabilities, people transitioning from homelessness, and older adults into housing with appropriate amenities and services sized and designed to accommodate their households. I didn't know if anybody had comments on any of those. Yes,
Yeah,
sir.
I just have one. Thank you. I think this is great. Let's do all this as soon as possible. This is a great bullet section. I just was going to suggest in the last bullet, again, I think in line with what we're doing above and below around affordability, that we just would add one word to the integrate people with disabilities, people transitioning from homelessness, and adults into housing with appropriate amenities. And if we could also say affordability, slide in affordability with appropriate affordability, amenities, and services sized and designed to accommodate their households. So I just would, I think another emphasis of affordability there would be consistent with what we've done and what we want to do. So that would be my suggestion to colleagues. Just literally add affordability right after appropriate and before amenities.
I have no issue with that. I think it was implied, but I think putting it there certainly doesn't hurt. I mean, all of those housing types are largely going to be subsidized in some way by government or nonprofit efforts, or a combination of both. And we all support that and have done a lot of work to pursue that. So adding that in there to just, put the belts and suspenders on that point, I think is, perfectly, reasonable by my perspective. I don't see an issue.
All right.
Thank you.
I wanted to raise an issue. Are you continue with this one, Linda, or?
No, please go ahead.
Okay. Well, social housing is mentioned here, but almost as though it's a type of building or construction type or something like that. But the vision of social housing, Linda, as you helped organize our forum on it, is a bit different. It's kind of more a coherent vision of how to build a community that has both affordable and market housing, presumably under public ownership. So I just wonder if we couldn't, and it's something I'm very enthusiastic about. I'm wondering if we couldn't maybe pull that phrase out of that bullet, out of that sentence, where it is confusing in its application, and see some language that we could consider for a broader statement about, embracing that kind of approach and thinking in more contexts in the county.
And I think there's actually sort of three things. So shared housing, social housing, and cooperative housing are really more, they're not about a building type necessarily. They're about a way to leverage housing differently, little different approaches on it. So maybe I can look at the language and see if we can just sort of split this into, make it clearer that there's sort of two separate things going on.
Thank you. I don't want to get carried away, but for example, I really believe that the right vision for the Purple Line corridor is a social housing vision, where a huge share of the housing in the corridor is actually under nonprofit or public ownership, mixing market rate and low income and modest income affordable. And, I would love to see the county adopt that vision for that area, so that we're expressing that it's it's going to be an economic driver, and it's going to be a place that is a source of growing prosperity. And at the same time, there's a vision of how it will be permanently inclusive and home to people of modest income, indefinitely. And so I just think it's an interesting way of thinking about the housing market, where a large share of it is under, again, purchased by nonprofits, redeveloped by nonprofits, HOC and the like. And okay, so that's kind of what I was getting at, but we'll maybe chew on some language and see what colleagues think. Councilmember Friedson. Yeah,
I was just going to say, we could get the language, because as Linda noted, I mean, there's a number of things in here that aren't necessarily about housing types. They're about,
Right.
shared housing, co-housing, beyond, cooperative housing, social housing. So if you separate that out, I think it would just be helpful to have language that separates all of that out, which are different into 2 bullets. I don't think that's, that changes the idea.
All right, so we'll work on that a bit more. Thank you.
Okay.
Okay, great. Let's keep going.
Okay. The next part of the memo goes back to the discussion that you had when you were in Chapter 3, Design, Arts, and Culture. And there were 2 practices in there. One was to adopt rules for a wider variety of housing types, such as tiny houses, cottages, courtyard clusters, duplexes, multiplexes, small apartment buildings, shared housing, co-housing, and accessory dwelling units. And the second was amend land use, design, and zoning regulations, including the zoning ordinance and subdivision regulations to remove regulatory barriers and facilitate development of a range of housing types. I think that while these were consistent, referencing the comment that Councilmember Friedson made earlier to try to clarify places where there might be some confusion, that Thrive is actually saying the council has decided already to do something, as opposed to they will continue to consider it in this vision that's being adopted. Just 2 little amendments to the language would be to take out adopt and say consider proposed rules, and to take out amend and say consider amendments. And that those would, in essence, soften that language a little bit to indicate that there hasn't been a decision in Thrive to specifically do a certain action.
All right, well, let me kick us off here. Let me suggest that we ask the chair and council staff to work together a little bit more. I don't particularly love jumping immediately to the consider, but perhaps there's a way to, express to speak to that concern a little bit more without going so far as to just say, well, we're just going to consider. I do think there is a goal of Thrive here to espouse a vision in some clear terms, but, at the same time, Thrive cannot require the council to do anything. And there's no point in pretending that it will require us to do anything. So I think some, a little bit more refined language could be appropriate. Councilmember Friedson.
Yeah, I appreciate that. I'm not, wedded to any particular language. I think, the language proposed by council staff here, I think is more in keeping with the overarching, visionary document. Amend and adopt are very specific legislative actions, and something that we're specifically saying that this document does not do. And so I think it's very hard to say we're not doing something and then have, language that at least at face value looks counter to that. But in terms of what the language is, I think, certainly having council staff and planning staff work together to come forward with something that would achieve that outcome, I think, would be appropriate, and I think would, be helpful, and has happened in a number of other areas throughout the plan.
Councilmember Joanna.
Linda, were you saying something? Okay. Yeah, I think if we want to come back to it, obviously this is, again, clearly saying that we're not, Thrive isn't saying you have to do anything. I think that saying that this is a direction we should, for lack of a better word, consider is not necessarily a bad thing. But if you want to try to find another synonym or another set of words, I'm open to that. But I think sending the message that these are inconsistent with the housing goals of different types, size, price points. One of the other things that I've heard, and I know it might not be a way to get this in a broad document. But I want to acknowledge the concern, because I've heard it a lot, as it relates to attainable to missing middle or this type of housing, these type of diverse housing types, is that, well, it doesn't work everywhere the same, right? There's no blanket rule. Montgomery County is different all over. Even if it's in a metro, we have very residential. And so we'll get into that discussion when we actually implement, if we implement something. And, as I said, I have a DTA that gives a point of view on that, but it's not, we're going to discuss that and have more discussion in the future. I think if the reason to have a softer approach here, I think, is because I know we all know that's the case. Different parts of Montgomery County are different and not in line with compact communities and corridors and all the many concepts in Thrive. It's going to look different in different places. And we need to be thoughtful about that. And so I, for all those reasons, and just to give voice to that concern, which I've heard, of people who aren't necessarily against this concept, but that are concerned about what it would mean as it's applied. I think having a softer, language here, like consider or something else, is appropriate. So I'll end where I finished. Or where I started. I'm happy to, if the chair wants to kind of sit back, I'm happy to.
All right. So it sounds like there's a general comfort level with consider. However, we will consider anything else that planning and staff brings us.
We're going to use the softer language of consider and consider.
All right.
We'll consider for your consideration.
Thank you. That would be a considerably good idea. Okay.
Okay. The third policy area is to promote racial and economic diversity and equity in housing in every neighborhood. And this includes calibrating the applicability of the MPDU program and other affordable housing programs to provide price-regulated units appropriate for income levels ranging from deeply affordable to workforce. Develop targeted strategies to minimize gentrification and displacement while promoting integration and avoiding the concentration of poverty. Refine regulatory tools and financial incentives with a goal of avoiding a net loss of market rate and income restricted affordable housing stock without erecting disincentives for the construction of additional units. Identify and allocate additional revenues for the Housing Initiative Fund and other county programs to meet the needs of low-income households. Expand existing programs designed to increase access to home ownership, especially among low-income residents, people of color, and young adults, and create new programs and entities such as community land trusts to maintain long-term affordable home ownership properties, and improve collection of data on neighborhood change and monitor and address involuntary displacement, disinvestment, and related phenomena. And I recommend supporting those policies and the associated practices. And I just wanted to note, when you look at the next section of the packet, which is the metrics, at the advice of our previous analyst for racial equity, we've amended some of the metrics to make sure that we are disaggregating by race, income, and area, so that when you look to see if these practices have actually been put into place, the data that you collect will help you to see that. So I did just want to kind of put the two of those things together. The metrics obviously address all three of the major policies, but I think they're really important to look at them together with the third policy related to equity.
Okay, good. Thank you.
Okay. And then there is information in your packet about the action list of resources. And this came up earlier. And actually, I've been tried to be clear in this particular staff memorandum to not call it an appendix. And I think that that is something that has now become a little confusing and would be good to clarify. So for example, the glossary is an appendix in the main Thrive document, but the action list of resources is actually a separate document. So if the council were to move forward with adopting Thrive based on the committee's work, you would not be adopting the action list of resources. What staff has said to you previously is that the recommendation is to come back, look at all the action list of resources, and then see how you might want to endorse it or adopt it or put it in some kind of a strategy that you can come back and revisit frequently, because the actions really are something that should be a little fluid and easily reviewed, and not part of something that would take a very big process to go back in and address. And I'd let planning correct me if they think I've misstated anything about what their intent is on the actions.
No, that's absolutely correct.
And I would go one step further. Our intention was not even that the council would ever approve this whole set of actions as a group. The idea was, and we took some criticism about this when the planning board draft removed these specific actions, because everybody has some actions that they really, really like. And I took some actions out of the document, as did others, that I really support, but we felt they were just not appropriate for a general plan. And so we got a lot of criticism for taking out these actions, but at the risk of sounding like I'm sort of doing the victory dance here, I think this vindicates the judgment that that it would have been a problem to try to include these very detailed action items in the general plan, not only because that really locks you in for the next 20 or 30 years, but also because you just dive down the rabbit hole of all these specifics, and we would be here for the next 5 years trying to hash out every detail of every specific action item. The idea here was, by taking these action items and putting them in a separate document, was simply to show, for illustrative purposes, some ideas about how you might begin chipping away at the process of implementing these. Not to say that every one of those is going to be done or that they won't change. And there already is a process for you to decide how to implement any policy, and that's the planning department's work program, which you review during the budget process, and you give us additional mid-course corrections during the semi-annuals, which we're going to have coming up. And so I would say the way to think about this is that this is simply an illustration of what the planning department's work program might look like over the next several years, and you will have the opportunity repeatedly to revisit that, recalibrate incrementally as we all move forward as organizations. Some of us will be gone by then. There will be personnel turnover, but this overarching vision document is supposed to inform that work program. The work program itself is set and it evolves over time. So to the extent that anybody wants to put in any language that makes it crystal clear that these action items are not part of the plan, I think that is very helpful. And I would even go so far as to say, if you want to look at the whole package later as collectively to see what you think of it, that's fine. But I don't even think that's necessary, because just in the ordinary course of business, we will be revisiting these specific topics, and you will have every opportunity to decide how, if at all, you want us to implement the specifics that feed into this general vision.
Okay. I mean, I will say, I think it's important for you to settle on on a work program that follows what you've recommended in the action items for Thrive. So you're absolutely right that we can take those up in the due course of, Pam has said we should take it all up this summer, which I think sounds great. But, I think that I don't want to downplay the action items as though they're not action items you will also pursue. So.
Oh, we absolutely will, and we will serve those up to you. I think we'll work with you to figure out what are the manageable pieces. But really, we have, as you know, a lot of other business to conduct between now and end of 2022. So
absolutely, yeah.
Yeah, I was just going to mention that I do think it's important to review these items at some point in the future. I don't think that currently, as it stands now, the planning department's work program is a very high level work program, and it is at a much higher level than I think the action items have been written in this document that accompanies the general plan and that people have been following and reading. And so there's a little bit of a disconnect there. And I think it would be good just to come back and have a discussion of what items are included in this action item list, what is a potential time frame for some of these. That will play into a work program at some point and in some level, depending on what the action item itself actually is. But some of these action items would never show up actually in the work program chart that gets talked about with the county council and gets covered. So there's a little bit of a disconnect. I think it still would be good to come back to them. And I think it assures the people that are interested in these items and that believe they really do implement the document, that there's a purposefulness to it and that the council is going to look at it, even just a review.
Okay.
And actually, I would also say that several of the comments from the Department of Housing and Community Affairs are about the actions, and that I agree with planning to not have them in the Thrive document, but that's because I see that these are the kinds of things you should be discussing with the Department of Housing and Community Affairs, along with planning, along with Housing Opportunities Commission, because you're creating a set of actions that have to be taken by more than just the planning department as it relates to, meeting all these housing goals.
And that was going to be my point exactly, which is, I think we have given some thought to the actions. We've thought about what some might be short-term, medium-term, long-term. We also know that it's not going to be planning who is going to be undertaking each of these actions. There will be a variety of organizations and agencies that need to be involved. And it's the same thing, honestly, with the metrics. We think they're, again, subsequent to approval of Thrive. We need to come up with a game plan for doing the metrics. Who in government will analyze each of the metrics? How often will they do it? So, we think that there is room for a follow-up action on both the metrics and the list of actions to sort of come up with the game plan of who's responsible, how often will they report out, how, are the actions short, medium, or long term? And I think we, again, once we get a few of these other projects passed off to you all, we'll be ready to spend a little time thinking about that and maybe sharing some information.
Okay. See some hands up. Councilmember Friedson.
Yeah, appreciate it. I mean, I share everybody's views here. I think one of the challenges with the actions as they've come over, many residents, including our own Department of Housing and Community Affairs, have focused quite extensively on this list of actions that look to be prescriptive of exactly what this document is going to do and what it means, and it has created the appearance that the action items are before us, which they're not. The action items are supposed to be what follows. So I do think we need to make some efforts here to disentangle the two. I mean, we will have to implement the vision, but we have to decide on what the vision is before we decide on how to implement it. It's the point I made earlier about determining the destination, getting buy-in for the destination, and then figuring out exactly what the best directions are on how to get there. And I do think compared to the work plan that we normally review, this is a much more exhaustive in terms of the breadth of the list, and also much more specific in terms of what is the action that is intended to be taken than we would normally do in a work plan approval. And so I do think this requires some refinement to figure out what the council's role is going to be vis-a-vis this document, what this document actually is, whether or not it's going to be approved, whether it's going to be discussed, and how we move forward in that regard. But I do think it's important, if this is not part of Thrive, and we're not approving this as part of Thrive, that we make that very clear, and then we have a process that we set up in order to address the actions and make clear the difference between this list of actions and the work program, which is actually what's going to guide the planning department's work over the next several years in the beginning of the implementation of this process, which this list of actions really isn't a work program. It may inform a work program, but it's not actually the work program. And traditionally, it's the work program that the council reviews and approves for the planning department, not necessarily a list of actions, some of which may be included in some of the work that the planning department does, some of which the actions are quite specific, and some of which the actions are a bit more broad, and some actions are not actually, as noted by Ms. Wright earlier, planning department responsibilities at all. They're either multi-departmental responsibilities or another department or agency altogether.
All right. So we'll come back to that for sure. Pam?
I think, Ms. McMillan, are you still?
Oh, Linda.
Working through the, yeah.
I do see DHCA had a hand
Oh,
up.
thank you. Sorry.
Yeah.
DHCA.
Good afternoon, everyone. It's been
Hi, Dr. McCobb. How are you?
Good. It's been pretty exciting discussion. Just a couple of points, although we mentioned our comments, which are mentioned within on page 18 and 19 of the staff report and also as an attachment. Just a couple of high-level points, and just going back to the basics a little bit about the general plan. The general plan, in this case, also known as the Thrive, lays down the foundation work for any master plan or for zoning. Now, we did speak about that this Thrive document does not change the zoning, which has caused some confusion. And as mentioned on page 5, and we just talked about changing the adopt or amend word to consider, whatever the final word is. It does talk about changing the zoning. So that was going to be our one comment, and there may be other comments which the county executive may send over shortly. But then the other comments that we have on this general plan is the general plan puts a lot of emphasis on market housing, missing middle housing, but it doesn't pay the same emphasis on affordable housing per se. There is what we mean is there's no teeth to the general plan to require future developers to promote affordable housing. And where I'm going with all of this is just looking across the river in Fairfax County, the Board of Supervisors, have adopted or received recommendations for changing the comprehensive plan to include no net loss policy. They're going to public hearing, in the fall. They're not done yet with the no net loss policy per se, but that's something which they'll be looking at within their comprehensive plan. So that's something which will really help, to put no net loss policy within the general plan, to put more of an emphasis on not losing national green affordable housing. This is an equity issue per se. And then we discussed about the MPDUs, a couple of just other points, and I'll take a pause. We talked about the MPDUs, increasing, the MPDUs at lower income level. The plan does talk about income averaging, but it doesn't really talk about providing MPDUs either more in number and then also at or below 50% of AMR. We talked a little bit about providing housing for seniors or special needs population, those with physical disabilities. But the plan doesn't really say that these type of housing will be required in all communities and will be designated in the master plan. And the other point that we were going to make was in terms of, and this was talked about a little bit, rent stabilization around the transit-oriented developments and also walkable communities. Because traditionally speaking, those communities have seen higher rent increase versus rent increase elsewhere in the county. So what we are saying basically is, to take this plan and also to put more teeth into the plan, to require affordable housing within the overall, Thrive plan, and to require it versus aspirational goal per se, versus
Okay.
having a separate document in terms of actions and taking a look at those actions separately. So those are going to be our comments. Thank you.
Well, I'd really take exception with those comments. I'm sorry, Director Nagam, but I just can't agree at all that the general plan that we're considering for Thrive Montgomery 2050 is in any way, doesn't speak forcefully to affordable housing. And I mean, we've been talking about affordable housing all day. I think a primary thrust of the equity vision and the housing vision is to increase our supply of protected and affordable housing. And we're talking about it in a whole lot of different ways. So I know that there has been assertion from some quarters that, Thrive isn't, forceful on affordable housing. I just think that's a willful misreading of the plan. But perhaps you meant to tailor your comment to a specific policy area. There's been some accusation about missing middle not having enough affordability. And I think we can certainly discuss that. But I think in general, I would say that housing affordability is, I don't know if there is a more crucial element of the Thrive Montgomery 2050 than promoting housing affordability. It's probably the first job of the plan. And maybe with transportation followed, and then environment. I'm not, and equity. I'm not sure, but let's hear some comments from, if anybody would like to offer some. Councilmember Jawanda.
Yeah, I would just, you kind of side referenced me there, Mr. Nagam, on some of the things I've been bringing up here over the last hour. I think this provides a framework to do what we need to do. The thing is, as much as I'd love to be very prescriptive and say, this is exactly how we're going to achieve affordable housing, that's not what the general plan should do in that way. And I mentioned that in the context of deeply affordable, in the context of public land, for example. I introduced a bill with a perspective of how to do that. I have other bills pending, like around rent stabilization near transit, right? So I think we will get into those things. And I think that those policies, which I think some of which you just spoke to, would be in line with the general framework of this plan as one of the things that we should look at doing. I understand your point of to be more forceful, but I think at this point we want to lay out the vision and strongly say that this is the absolute priority. We don't get more of everything if we don't have this. And then we have to have the political and policy debates and discussions about how to get there under the council, and I think that's the appropriate venue. So I understand what you're saying, but I think we have the vision appropriately kind of measured out and laid out here. Thank you.
Thank you, Councilmember Fritz.
Yeah, I think that was said well. I just would point out, as was noted, the idea that you would add teeth to something that is a vision is incongruent. I mean, that's the whole conversation that we're having here today. Let's establish what the vision is, and let's, after we've decided on the vision, determine how to implement it. I understand that the county executive has a different vision for the county and a different view in many respects of how to implement it, but it is challenging when there's a concern that something is too specific, and then also a concern that it isn't specific enough and doesn't have enough teeth. And I think that's what we've heard in many respects, which is hard to reconcile. But I do think that it's important that we stick to what this is and what it isn't, that we be very clear about what it is and what it isn't, and that we do our best to comb through the document and make sure we're being consistent with what our goals are and what we all have said and believe that this is. I think today's conversation has been a productive exercise in moving in that direction. There's some more refinement that's going to take place on how to ensure that this is true to being a visionary document, not necessarily an implementation tool. And I just hope that we stick to the specifics of what's actually in here and then stay consistent with what it is and what it isn't.
Chair, I'll just take 30 seconds. So, I mean, in terms of